It began on a hot summer afternoon, the kind of day where the heat sits heavy over the neighborhood like a smothering blanket. Lawns glistened under the steady spray of sprinklers, and most families had retreated indoors to escape the relentless sun. But not me. I was outside with Max, my German shepherd, who loved nothing more than patrolling the backyard, ears pricked, tail wagging, watching over the fence like he was the unofficial guardian of the entire block. Max barked occasionally, just the sharp, quick kind of barks a dog gives when he hears a car pull up or when kids run past the fence. He wasn't aggressive and certainly not a nuisance. To me, his voice was comforting, the natural soundtrack of a dog who belonged, but comfort for one person is irritation for another. And for Karen, my next-door neighbor, Max's barking was nothing short of a personal insult. Karen had lived on this street long before me, and everyone knew her reputation. She was the self-appointed neighborhood watchdog, though she preferred to call herself the guardian of peace. She kept her grass clipped to the precise regulation length, measured her hedges with an actual ruler, and made it her life's mission to remind others when they didn't live up to her impossible standards. When I first moved in, she wasted no time telling me that the neighborhood had standards to uphold and that she'd be keeping an eye on me. I brushed it off then, thinking it was just an overzealous neighbor being nosy. But little did I know she was serious. It started small. A polite note tucked into my mailbox, complaining that Max barked too much during the afternoon. Then, another one, this time less polite, claiming that the barking disrupted her meditation practice. Soon after, she escalated. The HOA sent me a letter stating that multiple complaints had been lodged against me. The letter threatened fines, and, if the disturbance continued, further action. I knew exactly who had filed those complaints. Karen. At first, I tried to accommodate. I kept Max indoors more often, especially in the afternoons. I even bought one of those ultrasonic anti-bark devices, though Max rarely barked enough to need it. But no matter what I did, the complaints kept coming. According to Karen, Max barked. In the early morning, late at night, and even when I wasn't home. It didn't matter that I had security footage proving otherwise. Karen was determined to make my dog the villain of the street. Things escalated quickly. She started recording Max whenever he barked, standing on her porch with her phone out like some kind of evidence-collecting detective. She emailed the HOA every week with her proof. By the third letter from the association, I knew this wasn't going to end quietly. But here's the irony of it all. Karen wasn't the only one with loud animals. She owned two massive parrots, bright green and red macaws that sat in a giant cage on her back porch. They squawked, screeched, and mimicked sounds at all hours of the day. Their cries carried across fences, over rooftops, even into homes down the block. Most neighbors tolerated it because parrots were parrots. But it was more than ironic to hear Karen accuse Max of disturbing the peace while her parrots screamed like wild jungle creatures every sunrise. Still, nobody said anything, yet. The CHOA seemed blind to the parrots' noise, probably because Karen was their most active member, always volunteering for committees, always pushing her agenda. She had influence, and she knew it. I felt cornered. Max wasn't just my dog. He was my companion, my family. The thought of him being taken away because of exaggerated complaints was unbearable. I tried reasoning with the HOA, but they insisted that multiple reports proved the dog was disruptive. I even suggested they listen to the parrots, but they brushed it off. And then, something unexpected happened. One late evening, just as the sun dipped below the rooftops, I sat in my backyard with Max at my side. The air was heavy, the cicadas buzzing, when suddenly I heard it. From Karen's yard, clear as day, came the voice of a man. Not a scream, not a squawk, but actual words carried in a mocking, high-pitched tone. "Help me! Don't tell anyone! Help me!" At first, I thought it was a TV. Maybe Karen was watching some crime show too loudly. But then it came again, repeated, in the unmistakable echoing cadence of one of her parrots. "Help me! Don't tell anyone!" I froze. Max tilted his head, ears perked, confused. The words continued, sometimes broken, sometimes jumbled, but unmistakably human. It wasn't a recording. It was the parrots, mimicking something or someone they had heard. And in that moment, a chill ran through me. Because whatever secret Karen had been hiding, it seemed her parrots were ready to reveal it to the entire neighborhood. The first night I heard the parrots, I tried to brush it off as coincidence. Maybe they had picked up a random sound from television. After all, parrots were notorious for mimicking whatever they heard. But deep down, I knew this wasn't some harmless mimicry. The tone in the birds' voices carried urgency, almost desperation. Over the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Karen's parrots weren't ordinary background noise. They were messengers, repeating something that sounded chillingly like a cry for help. The phrase looped in my mind. "Help me! Don't tell anyone!" The more I listened, the more disturbing it became. The parrots didn't just repeat it once or twice. They said it constantly, throughout the day, mixing it in with their usual screeches. The repetition wasn't random. It was ingrained, as if the birds had been exposed to those exact words over and over again. And then, one morning, I heard something new. "Stop screaming! Shut up!" The parrots yelled the phrase with startling clarity, their shrill voices echoing through the neighborhood. The sound was sharp, angry, and unmistakably human in origin. My skin prickled with unease. By now, I had begun to notice small things about Karen's house that seemed off. Her blinds were always drawn, even in the brightest part of the day. Delivery men came and went more often than seemed normal, but Karen never opened the door to greet them. Packages piled up, then disappeared overnight. And though Karen claimed to live alone, the parrot's mimicry hinted otherwise. It wasn't long before other neighbors started noticing too. One afternoon, as I walked Max down the street, I overheard two women whispering about Karen's birds. One laughed nervously, imitating the parrot's cries, but the other shook her head and muttered that it didn't sound like a joke anymore. Word was spreading, even if nobody dared confront Karen directly. Meanwhile, the HOA continued to hound me about Max. Another letter arrived, this time warning that if the barking persisted, animal control could be contacted. The absurdity of it nearly drove me mad. My dog, who barked at passing cars, was considered a menace, while Karen's parrot screamed human pleas for help and nobody batted an eye. I felt helpless, until I remembered the one advantage I had: proof. I set up cameras in my backyard, angled carefully toward the fence that separated my property from Karen's. Every time the parrots squawked their eerie words, my cameras captured it. The footage built up quickly, hours of recordings filled with chilling phrases. Sometimes the parrots begged for help. Other times they mimicked angry shouting, cursing, or the sound of something crashing. The more I recorded, the more convinced I became that Karen wasn't just a difficult neighbor. She was hiding something the parrots had absorbed from the environment inside her home. But proof wasn't enough. I couldn't exactly march into the HOA with video clips of parrots and claim they exposed a dark secret. They'd laugh me out of the room, or worse, accuse me of fabricating evidence to deflect attention from Max. I needed more. That more came sooner than expected. One evening, just after sunset, I took Max for his usual walk. As we passed Karen's house, I heard the parrots again. This time, the words were chillingly different. "Don't hurt me! Please stop!" The parrot's shriek carried down the block. Lights flicked on in nearby houses, curtains twitched, and people stepped onto their porches. For the first time, it wasn't just me who heard. Half a dozen neighbors stopped in their tracks, their faces mirroring the same uneasy shock I felt. Karen appeared on her porch moments later, her expression tight, her voice dripping with artificial cheer as she scolded the parrots loudly. She waved to the neighbors, pretending it was all a silly misunderstanding. But the damage was done. The parrots had spoken too clearly, too urgently, for anyone to dismiss it as coincidence. That night, my phone buzzed with messages from neighbors. Some were joking, others uneasy, but one message stood out. "Have you ever thought Karen might not be living alone?" It was the same thought that had haunted me since the first time I heard the parrots. The following week, the HOA called an emergency meeting, not about the parrots, but about Max. Karen had formally filed for enforcement action against me, pushing the board to issue a final warning. Sitting in that sterile meeting room, I listened as Karen listed every supposed offense, barking at all hours, disturbing her sleep, making the neighborhood unsafe. She spoke with confidence, as though she were untouchable. But then, as if on cue, the parrot struck again. The meeting was held in the community center, right across the street from Karen's house. And through the open windows, faint but unmistakable, came the parrot's cries. "Help me! Don't tell anyone!" The room fell silent. Karen's face turned pale, her confident smile faltering. For once, her perfect composure cracked. The HOA board shifted uneasily. A few members glanced at one another, while others stared at Karen. She tried to laugh it off, claiming her parrots were playful and enjoyed mimicking TV shows. But the timing couldn't have been worse. Her crusade against Max suddenly seemed petty in the shadow of her parrots screaming for help. I didn't speak up during the meeting. I didn't need to. The parrots had spoken louder than I ever could. When the meeting ended, Karen stormed out, her face twisted with fury. She didn't look at me, didn't speak to anyone, but I knew this wasn't over. Whatever she was hiding, the parrots weren't going to let it stay hidden much longer. And that's when I realized Max's barking had only been the start. The real story wasn't about a dog at all. It was about the parrots, the cries they repeated, and the secret buried behind Karen's closed doors. Before Karen had been the untouchable force of the neighborhood, the one everyone tolerated, even feared, because of her influence on the HOA. But now, after hearing those parrots cry out during the meeting, neighbors could no longer ignore the strange reality behind her perfectly trimmed hedges and pristine driveway. For the first time, in years, Karen wasn't the one whispering about others. She was the subject of the whispers. At first, the conversations were quiet, cautious. People mentioned the parrots in passing, pretending it was a silly neighborhood joke. But beneath the laughter was unease. "What do you think they've been hearing?" one neighbor asked another. "That didn't sound like TV to me," someone else would reply. Slowly, the rumors spread. Even the most neutral families, the ones who usually kept out of drama, couldn't deny the unsettling reality. Those parrots weren't repeating sitcom laugh tracks or commercials. They were repeating human voices, pleas, shouts, desperation, and Karen knew it. I saw the change in her immediately. Where she once strutted confidently across her lawn, greeting neighbors with that smug smile, she now avoided eye contact. She hurried to collect her mail instead of lingering at the curb. She yelled at her parrots more often, her shrill voice carrying into the street. At night, I'd hear muffled noises from her house, sometimes shouting, sometimes the thump of something heavy against the walls. The parrots, of course, mimicked it all the next day. But the strangest part was how Karen tried to overcompensate. She started putting up cheerful seasonal decorations in her yard, as if to prove she had nothing to hide. She baked cookies for the HOA board and left them in neatly wrapped packages. She even started jogging around the block every morning, smiling tightly at anyone who looked her way. It was all an act, though. Everyone could see it. The parrots, meanwhile, grew louder. Their cries evolved. "Help me!" turned into, "Don't hit me!" followed by mocking laughter, then, "Be quiet or else!" Their voices were so sharp, so eerily human, that even passing cars slowed down when they heard it. Children in the neighborhood started asking their parents what the parrots meant. Parents, uncomfortable and unsure, had no answers. One night, I was sitting in my backyard with Max when I heard something different. A sound that froze me in place. The parrots were crying, but it wasn't their usual mimicry. It was sobbing. Deep, rattling sobs, broken up by the occasional whimper. And then, faintly, as though mocking a voice it had heard countless times, one of the parrots said, "Don't tell the neighbors, they'll ruin everything." It was Karen's voice. Knew it then. The parrots weren't just repeating background noise. They were repeating private conversations, arguments, and secrets from inside her home. The neighborhood began to speculate wildly. Some thought Karen was hiding a family member, maybe an adult child, maybe a relative. Others whispered darker. Theories that Karen might be holding someone against their will. The parrots had said help me too many times for anyone to dismiss it. The HOA tried to intervene, but this time not in the way Karen expected. At the next meeting, instead of siding with her, they addressed the complaints about noise, her parrots. Noise. For the first time, Karen herself was the target of official reprimand. Her reaction was explosive. She stormed into the meeting with a binder full of papers, ranting about bylaws and neighborhood harmony, but her voice trembled as she spoke. Her parrots, left alone at home, squawked so loudly that even through closed doors across the street, the neighborhood could hear them, and then came the breaking point. One Saturday morning, a group of neighbors gathered for a community yard sale. Families spread out tables, kids sold lemonade, and for a few hours the block felt cheerful again. Karen, of course, did not participate, but her parrots had other plans. Around midday, their voices carried across the street, louder than ever. "Stop!" "Screaming!" one parrot shrieked. "Please don't hurt me!" The other followed. The yard sale came to a complete halt. Parents froze, children stared, and people turned toward Karen's house with wide, horrified eyes. There was no mistaking the words. A woman dropped the glass she was holding. Another muttered that she was calling the police. Karen bolted out. Of her front door, her face pale and panicked. She yelled at the parrots, clapping her hands, trying desperately to silence them. But the damage was done. The entire neighborhood had heard. The police arrived within the hour. Karen argued with them on her porch, her voice sharp and frantic, insisting the parrots were just noisy pets. But the officers weren't so easily convinced. They entered her home for a wellness check, leaving the neighbors buzzing with nervous anticipation. I stood on my lawn with Max, heart pounding, as the minutes stretched into an eternity. Finally, the officers emerged. They didn't arrest Karen, but their faces were grim. They said nothing as they walked back to their car. Karen stood in her doorway, arms crossed, glaring at the neighborhood like we were the enemy. But the parrots weren't finished. That very night, their cries rang out again, and this time, they repeated something new, something that made my blood run cold. "We can't keep them here forever." By the time the parrots screamed, "We can't keep them here forever," the neighborhood's patience had shattered. Nobody could dismiss it as random noise anymore. The parrots weren't just repeating words. They were relaying fragments of conversations that were never meant to leave Karen's house. And those conversations carried the weight of something far darker than a barking dog or a petty HOA complaint. The entire block was on edge. Parents pulled their children closer when walking past Karen's property. Neighbors gathered in hushed groups at the ends of driveways, their voices low but urgent. For the first time in years, the focus wasn't on maintaining lawns or painting fences. It was on Karen and what she might be hiding. The HOA board, once her greatest weapon, had grown uncharacteristically quiet. They no longer sent me letters. About Max. In fact, one board member even admitted to me in private that the parrots had been haunting her too. She lived 2 doors down and had heard the same chilling cries through her open windows at night. Then came the night that shattered everything. It was close to midnight when I woke to Max pacing restlessly near the back door. His ears twitched, his body tense. At first I thought it was a raccoon or stray cat, but then I heard it too. The parrots, shrieking louder than ever before, their cries cutting through the still night air. "Help! Let me out!" one parrot screamed. "Don't tell anyone, don't tell!" the other echoed. I rushed outside, and I wasn't the only one. Porch lights flicked on up and down the street. Doors opened. Neighbors emerged in their pajamas, their faces pale, their eyes wide. Everyone heard it. Everyone knew. And then, a different sound. Not the parrots this time. A heavy crash, followed by the unmistakable sound of a door slamming inside Karen's house. It was the final straw. Someone called the police again, and within minutes, flashing lights lit up the street. Officers arrived, more serious than before, their hands resting on their belts as they approached Karen's door. She resisted at first, yelling through the crack that everything was fine, that the neighbors were harassing her, that the parrots were acting up. But the parrots betrayed her again. "Stop crying! Be quiet!" They shrieked in unison, their voices overlapping, eerie and damning. That was enough. The police forced entry. What they found inside became the talk of the town for years to come. The parrots hadn't been mimicking television shows or random noises. They had been mimicking Karen's life, the fights, the threats, the desperate cries of the person she had been hiding. In a locked back room, the officers discovered a man. He was disheveled, thin, and shaken, but alive. His story unraveled in pieces over the following days, but what emerged was clear. Karen had been keeping him there, isolated from the outside world. Whether he was a relative, a tenant, or something more complicated, nobody ever got the full truth. What mattered was that the parrots had repeated enough of his cries to expose the reality Karen had tried so hard to conceal. The neighborhood watched in stunned silence as the man was escorted out of the house, blinking under the harsh streetlights. Karen stood on her porch, handcuffed, her once perfect composure shattered beyond repair. The very HOA she had used as her shield now looked on with the same horrified disbelief as everyone else. In the days that followed, the parrots became unlikely heroes. News crews swarmed the neighborhood, their cameras capturing footage of the colorful birds screeching from their cage, the same cage that had betrayed Karen's darkest secret. Headlines blared with shocking phrases. "Parrots expose hidden prisoner," and "Noisy birds crack neighborhood mystery." The HOA, humiliated by their blind allegiance to Karen, quietly dropped every complaint against me. Max, my loyal German shepherd, was suddenly seen as the neighborhood protector rather than a nuisance. Neighbors who once rolled their eyes at his barking now greeted him warmly on walks, grateful that his vigilance had indirectly led to the truth being uncovered. Karen's house sat empty after that, its blinds still drawn, its porch stripped of decorations. For months, nobody wanted to go near it. Eventually, the HOA put it up for sale, but the whispers lingered. Even new potential buyers seemed unsettled when they heard the parrots' legacy retold by curious locals. As for the parrots, they were rehomed by animal services, their future uncertain, but their impact undeniable. The neighborhood felt quieter, without their shrieks, though in the silence, we all remembered what those cries had revealed. And me? I often sat on my porch in the evenings with Max at my side, reflecting on how everything had unfolded. The irony was impossible to ignore. Karen had tried to destroy my life over a dog who barked too much, but in the end, it was her own noisy pets that destroyed hers. The parrots had exposed the secret she thought would stay hidden forever, and in doing so, they reminded us all that, no matter how carefully someone controls appearances, the truth has a way of finding its voice, even if it comes from the beak of a bird.